I am talking from the heart of a very dear friend of mine who is here, but didn't have, was so distraught that she had to speak up about her loss again and again. And as I said, that it leaves you very emotionally vulnerable when you do that. So I'm here speaking about Shashi Ji's story. Before I do that, I just want to touch on the losses, the tangible and the intangible losses. The tangible ones, we are talking about people who died, people who had to flee, how many people, in numbers of hundreds and thousands. So there were about, and this number varies, I think that this is the lower number, 765 Kashmiri Pandits murdered, 22 females were raped, 65 males were kidnapped and released, and 57 Sikhs killed. There were individual killings, there were massacres. But I think that the numbers probably could go up to like 1,000 and more. We are not even including the soldiers, the Jawans, who have been killed in this fight in Kashmir. And the intangible losses cannot be touched. They're the ones, they're your personal pain that you cannot calculate in numbers. And the last 30 years, we have been dealing with those intangible losses. And we are still counting. There have been so many losses in terms of, like I said, identity, culture, tradition, language. Those are yet to be seen. So now I'm going to speak about loss, the murder and killing of Mrs. Sheila Piku Kaul. So Mrs. Sheila Piku Kaul is Shashi's aunt. And she was shot on October 31st, 1989. I'm going to read it because I don't know all the details. So on that fateful day, she had gone to visit her brother who lived in Shivpura, a few miles away, just to see how they were doing. And she was trying to rush back home because her daughter was returning from her university and she wanted to be home before she came. And as she was crossing the bridge, the Habakadal Bridge, which most of us we know where it is, she was trying to cross that bridge when suddenly a commotion broke out and she saw a mob descend on the bridge. And she was caught in this tear gas, shellings, and soon after the police, they started to make announcement on the loudspeakers to tell the pedestrians to lay flat on the ground, which she did. But as she, for the love of her family, she wanted to rush home and she wanted to be there to see her daughter, she got up, I think, and here she was shot in her chest. She was an easily identifiable target because she was wearing the traditional Hindu sari and a big bindi on her forehead. So the terrorists, which were hiding in a building across, just shot her. She fell down, bleeding. A milkman who knew her, saw her, and from the kindness of his heart, I guess, lifted her bleeding body into his cot and wheeled it into her home. As she was being passed through the streets, her bleeding body, the neighbors and everyone else on the street, they saw it. Finally, when they reached home, the only person in the home was her young son, who was an 8th grader. You can imagine what happened to that 8th grader when he's seeing his mother's body on a cot bleeding. He was in shock, paralyzed, he didn't know what to do. Soon after, I guess, her husband and her daughter came and there was chaos. They didn't know what to do. They tried so hard to get a vehicle to get her to the hospital, but couldn't find any because the commotion was there. There was still, the terrorists were outside. And so what they did is they wrapped her bleeding body in sheets and they lifted her and they ran to the hospital. They had to pass through streets, through lanes, through by-lanes, and they were running. Finally, when they did reach the hospital, she was declared dead. She had bled from her wounds. So, of course, at that time, when you were passing through the situation, your mind is clouded and you know what to do, but people who could have come and helped her were the neighbors, were the pedestrians, were everyone surrounding who could have called a taxi or something. But of course, there was no help coming. The entire family was devastated with this. Her husband had severe depression and passed away a distraught person. Her kids, they live here. One of them lives, I think, in Ohio, and the other one in Canada. They still live through those agonizing moments. They live in remorse and helplessness. Someone who has seen their parent pass in front of their eyes when they could have been saved, that stays with your life all throughout. The family was subject to another harrowing experience a few years later, when one of their cousins who had decided to stay back in Kashmir. 1992, October, I think it was October, Shashi might correct me. In 1992, Dr. A.K. Dhar was going to work. He had decided and defied all the warnings and stuff and decided to stay with his family. He was going to his office when he was kidnapped. The next 2 months would be the most harrowing of his experiences in his life. He was taken by terrorists and made to give medical care to the wounded jihadis. He was made to walk barefoot, blindfolded all the time because the terrorists were always on the move. And this he did. One day he heard that they were going to get rid of him and dump his body. When he begged for mercy from them, told them that he had elderly parents and they should release him. Some kind-hearted soul, I don't know where he got this human instinct, they released him. And he was then let go. Obviously, after that, they moved out of Kashmir. So when we say that, when people in Kashmir say, oh, they could have come back, there are multiple details, many people, and tens of massacres which happened after 1990. Always a reminder to us that if you come back, this is what is going to be your fate. Thank you.